This is Economics, Chapter 2, Section 4, Modern Economies, the Rise of Mixed Economies. First, we'll talk about the limits of laissez-faire. Laissez-faire literally means hands off. You get a definition from your book. I'll describe it more in detail. But laissez-faire is basically a free market economy. And free market economy is good in some respects, but it does have its downsides. Think about this. In a free market economy, okay, so if every individual made every choice for themselves, or every business made every choice for themselves, who would pay for an army? Who would pay for roads, or for those roads to be plowed? Okay, at first glance you say, well, everyone would with taxes. Well, if I have the choice, I'm not going to pay for taxes that will go towards public schools. I don't have kids. I don't send kids to school, so why would I pay a tax that would benefit people sending their kids to school? So it'd be very difficult in a perfectly free market economy for any of those things that we enjoy in America today to happen, as I just said, roads, public defense, things like that. So there is a need for government involvement in the economy. Over time, the amount of government involvement in the economy has increased, especially since the 1930s, having to do with the Great Depression. Some needs fall to the government so all can participate. As in, you need the government to say, suck it up, just pay your taxes, because you know what, other people need to go to school, and that's something that we're going to provide for all people, and then one day when you have kids, they'll go to school too. So here's some limits of laissez-faire. Governments make laws that protect property rights and patents. The Fifth Amendment is not just pleading the Fifth, like you don't self-incriminate. Another part of it is that you get just compensation if the government has to take private property. So for instance, let's say a new interstate was voted on and it was going to connect Interstate 55 with Interstate 60 whatever in Indiana, and it was going to run right through Herscher. Now, for that interstate to happen, land would have to be bought from private citizens. Those private citizens would have to be offered fair market value for that land so that the government could build that interstate. Okay, the government can't just take land from people without justifying it and without paying those individuals. So a mixed economy balances control and freedom. So the government can do some things but can't do others. If you want to look at figure 2.4 in your book, that'll give you a good example. So let's talk about governments in the factor market. So governments, just like individuals and businesses, purchase land, labor, and capital. The United States government has 2.8 million employees that are paid $9 billion in wages every year. Okay, that's what the government consumes. The government and the product market. All these people need buildings, office supplies, they need to communicate with one another, so on and so forth. So the government also consumes those resources. And the government also provides products, as we've already talked about. They provide roads, interstates, canals, other things like that, public transportation that we as consumers buy and participate in. Transferring money. The government collects taxes from people and firms and then transfers that money to people and firms. What do I mean by this? Well, if I were to be fired tomorrow, I could go file for unemployment insurance and I would get unemployment for a set number of months, or if I qualified, over a year, where the government would pay me back some of my money while I found a new job. If I became disabled and I couldn't work anymore, I could collect Social Security benefits. Government will also use tax money to save industries. The most modern example would be when the automobile industries began failing after the bubble collapsed in 2008 and 2009. Auto industry suffered. They were about to go bankrupt, so the government bailed them out, gave them loans, and allowed them to continue. So comparing mixed economies. First, free enterprise, definition for that. Then, as we've already said, private individuals make decisions, not the state. If you look at figure 2.5, it shows you all the different, or it shows you many different countries and where they fall on the spectrum of free market all the way down to command economy. Everyone falls somewhere in between depending on how much government involvement in the economy there is. This is a continuum, and if you give a definition for that, that'd be great. Mixed economies where government intervention dominates. So this is close to a centrally planned, but not a centrally planned. Very close to it. North Korea is the closest to a centrally planned economy. In North Korea, government owns all property and economic output. 95% of the goods are made by the state, and 95% of the industries are owned by the state. Imports from any of the country are banned, and there is no production of goods by foreign companies. So if Ford wanted to set up a shop in North Korea, they could not do that because their base of operations is the United States. It doesn't happen. China is on that side of the spectrum, but is moving away from that, moving more towards the free market. So about a quarter of all the enterprises in China are at least partially owned by individuals. Okay, there's been a transition. If you could give a definition for that and a definition for privatized, that'd be great. So there's been a transition in China, though, from government-owned to owned by individuals and firms. Okay, we call that privatization. That's a change. So let's talk about mixed economies where the market system dominates, or free market. Hong Kong, Great Britain, and China is moving in that direction, so pseudo as in almost China. In these places, the private sector rules, that's individuals. The government has laws that protect private property. There are wage and price controls on rent and some public services, meaning government has set limits on how much people can charge for rent in certain areas. They are highly receptive to foreign investment, meaning if you're a citizen of Great Britain and you want to invest in Ford Motor Company, you can. Okay? There are no barriers on foreign trade, so if Ford wants to sell its cars in Great Britain, you can do that without any problems. Banks are independent of the government, meaning it's not the United States Bank, it's the Bank of Hershey, it's the Bank of whatever, owned by individuals, not by the federal government. And foreign banks are equal or almost equal to domestic banks. So if France wants to open a bank in the United States, they can. They'll have somewhat more restrictions, but not very much more than a normal bank would. Now we'll talk about the United States economy. It's a free enterprise with government intervention. The government does protect private property. You can own your own home, you own your own property, things like that. There's free trade, and foreign investment is encouraged. Hyundai can come over here, can come over here, open up a plant, produce cars here, and that's okay. However, some domestic industries are protected. Most of them have to do with farming. The United States does not retaliate against trade restrictions. So if all of a sudden Great Britain says, you want to sell Ford cars here, we're going to have to make you pay an extra tax of $20 per car, whatever it is. We're not going to reciprocate and say any type of English car that's sold over here in the United States will also have a $20 tax. We don't do that. And foreign banks and domestic banks are almost equal in the United States. And that ends Chapter 2.